Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for coming, although I realise that most of you have to come, so but thank you anyway. I hope it's entertaining. I'll start with two caveats. The first one is that I have no background in literary criticism. I've never studied English since I left school. So I'm not particularly skilled at this sort of thing, unlike Dr. Moses. My one and only qualification is that I am a Tolkien nerd of the first order, okay? Like a total uber nerd when it comes to Tolkien. I first read The Lord of the Rings. I first read The Hobbit when I was 9, and then I read The Lord of the Rings when I was 11. I have since read it twice again as an adult, so I'm very much into it. That's my only qualification. But that's kind of the point, because the whole point of the Windhover lectures is that they're quite informal and they are delivered by staff and, more importantly, hopefully students, you, on just things that you really love and that excite you and that you like talking about. And that's it, and that's the only qualification you need. So I'm starting off the lectures, but what we're really excited about going forward is the prospect of hearing some of you do lectures on things that really interest you. That's much more important than people like me. The other caveat I'll give is that there are quite a lot of spoilers in this talk. So if you are about to read The Lord of the Rings or are early on in reading The Lord of the Rings, you actually have my permission to leave. I hope everyone doesn't leave now, because it will kind of spoil the book for you, but it's pretty difficult to discuss without doing the spoilers. So one of the interesting things about The Lord of the Rings is that it's been consistently voted for the last 30 years in lots of polls as the best loved book of the last century. It's viewed as one of the most important books of the last century, and probably the most popular of the important books of the last century, which is particularly surprising because it's a work of fantasy. And fantasy, along with horror, is usually viewed as cheap fiction, as kind of less good quality fiction than other types of fiction. So it's surprising that a fantasy work has become so important and so well loved by different generations. So the question is why? Why is it so popular? I think the answer to that is that it has depth, a great deal of depth, in 4 different ways. The most important way in which it has depth, and I couldn't lecture on this, but perhaps Dr. Moses would, is its linguistic depth. So in Lord of the Rings is actually built primarily around 2 languages, Quenya and Sindarin, which were entirely created by Tolkien. And they are pretty much full languages. This is what he did as a professor. Quenya is loosely linked to Finnish, and Sindarin is loosely linked to Welsh. So one of the things that gives Tolkien's work an air of reality is that it isn't just gibberish or made-up language. These are real language systems. It also has historical depth. Tolkien began writing about Middle-earth 40 years before he published The Lord of the Rings. He began writing his first stories about Middle-earth while he was in the trenches in World War I. So there is a real history, not a real history, but a history that he wrote behind these stories. So again, you can feel that when you're reading them, that they're not just made-up stories, that there's a sort of depth of history behind them. Then they have geographical depth as well, and this is why many people love the stories. A great Tolkien fan is Ray Mears, the guy who does all the sort of outside survivalist sort of stuff, and he loves Tolkien's work because of what he believes is the beauty and realism of the depiction of nature in his work. And then the last way in which his work has depth, which is the way that I'm most interested in and I wanted to talk about this afternoon, is the moral depth of the work. And all those different ways in which he's given the work depth, they make it feel true. And this is the difference between good fiction and bad fiction. It's the difference between good art and bad art. All art is a lie. Yeah? Middle-earth doesn't exist. It's made up. Okay, so in a factual sense, all art is a lie. But good art has a feeling of truth about it. And good art, as Picasso says here, art is the lie that enables us to realise the truth. And there's something about Tolkien's work which does that. It meets the criteria of being genuine art, good art. So I'm limiting myself to talking about the moral aspects of his work, and I'm limiting myself to talking about only some of them, because otherwise I'd be talking for hours. And I've just divided my presentation into talking about how Tolkien presents goodness, how he presents good, and then how he presents evil. And there is a theme running through most of Tolkien's representation of good, which is that it is about letting go of things. Okay? So it's not about conquering things or winning anything, it's about letting go, about giving things up. The first and most obvious thing I want to start with is the nature of Tolkien's hero. Now, there are a number of potential heroes. If you ask the question, who is the hero of Lord of the Rings, some people might say it's Aragorn, some people might say it's Gandalf, but really the hero of Lord of the Rings is Frodo the Hobbit and his friends. And what's notable about Frodo is how unheroic a hero he is. He is an anti-action hero, or a non-action hero. He never wins a fight. He gets beaten up a couple of times in the story by different people. He never wins a fight. In fact, he only draws his sword twice in the entire story, and it's a long story. Nevertheless, he is a model of courage, wisdom, and strength. But in particular ways, his courage lies in his humility. When he volunteers to take the ring, what he says is, "I will take the ring, although I do not know the way," which kind of sums up his character. So he's full of humility, and his wisdom lies in his mercy. There's an ongoing argument between him and his friend Sam about what they should do about their companion Gollum, because Sam, quite rightly, doesn't trust Gollum and wants to kill him. And Frodo keeps saying, no, we can't do that. Gollum was once a hobbit like us. I can still see good in him. I do not have the authority to take another person's life. And in the end, that mercy becomes really important. And then lastly, and most importantly, his strength lies in endurance. It lies in enduring the world rather than conquering it. And here I think it's important to note that amongst other things, The Lord of the Rings is a war story, because it's talking about a war, the War of the Ring. And it follows different sort of aspects of this war. And Tolkien lived through war. Tolkien was a soldier in the trenches in the First World War. And he very deliberately shows us that war is, there are moments of fighting in war, but those moments of fighting are punctuated by long periods of being cold, hungry, confused, exhausted, bored, and so on. Okay, and that is the actual reality of war. For the soldiers in the trenches, yes, there might be occasions when they had to go over the top, but most of the time what they were dealing with were things like creeping barrages and stuff like that. So they were basically sat in a trench up to their knees in water, with the skin falling off their feet, and rats running around, and just screaming, deafening bombs going off around them, trying very hard not to go mad, basically. And that was their experience of war. So this is really important. And Frodo's journey is like that. He doesn't fight. He doesn't win any fights. What he has to do is endure suffering. And that's really important. And so in short, actually, what Frodo is he's a Christian hero. He shows all these traditional heroic qualities of courage and wisdom and strength, but they're flipped on their head. He's not like an action hero. He is a Christian hero. One of the other interesting things about The Lord of the Rings is they're not trying to find a treasure. In most quest stories, the people on the quest set out to find a treasure. If you think of the classic one of the Holy Grail, of trying to find the Holy Grail. Unusually, in The Lord of the Rings, they are trying to get rid of a treasure. They're trying to lose it. And that's quite important. I put here the difference between desire and love, because it's difficult to say in one word what the ring, which is what the whole story is about, represents. But probably the closest thing to a definition is that the ring represents desire. And that's what they're trying to conquer. They're trying to conquer desire. And this was really important spiritually to Tolkien as a Catholic. So we've got a quote here from another Catholic writer who writes in the Jesuit tradition, the tradition of Ignatius Loyola. And she says, by the time we've reached midlife, most of us have had to grapple with an attachment that needed detaching. We will go through this many times before we're done with our journeys. Obviously, the main thing that happens to most human beings during our lifetime is that we lose things. Yeah? We lose our youth, we lose our looks, we lose some of our dreams, and gradually the people around us that we love, we lose them as well. So life is basically a sustained process of losing things. Okay? And spiritually, what Tolkien is saying through Lord of the Rings is that's what you have to learn to do. You have to learn not to hang on to things, but to let go of them and to lose them. Put another great quote here from Oscar Wilde. There are only two tragedies in life. One is not getting what one wants, and the other is getting it. What Wilde was saying there is that you are disappointed in life if you don't get what you want, and you're usually even more disappointed when you do get what you want in life. That's what human nature is like. There's this spiritual quest that they're all on to learn to let go of desire, Frodo in particular. And there's an interesting character, he doesn't appear in any of the films or anything, called Tom Bombadil, who they meet early in the story. And he's the only character in the book who is completely unaffected by the ring. He kind of plays around with the ring and he looks through the ring at Frodo and he puts the ring on his own finger and he doesn't disappear. And when Frodo puts the ring on his finger, Tom Bombadil can still see him. He's the only person in the entire story who the ring has no effect on whatsoever. There's plenty of other people. Frodo offers the ring to Gandalf, who's this mighty wizard. In fact, Gandalf is a Maiar, an immortal spirit. And Gandalf recoils in fear and says, do not give it to me. Because Gandalf knows that it will destroy him, that it will corrupt him. Later on, he offers it to Galadriel, who's this mighty ancient elf. And she too is tempted, but then says, I don't want it. Yeah, you take it, I don't want it. And she says, I have passed the test. Okay? So all these mighty people are afraid to touch the ring, because they know that it will corrupt them. But Tom Bombadil isn't bothered at all. And there's all kinds of speculation about who Tom Bombadil is. Tolkien himself said, I don't know. I just made him up. But he's kind of like a pan spirit. So Tom Bombadil is kind of like a spirit of nature. He's almost like a child. He has no desire. And at one point, Frodo says to him, so everything in the wood, because he lives in this wood called the Old Forest, belongs to you. And Tom Bombadil says, I don't even know what you mean by that. So it's almost as if Tom Bombadil sort of is the wood, and the wood is him. And he represents a sort of spiritual perfection, which is probably impossible. Okay? So Tom Bombadil is somebody who has passed beyond all desire. He no longer wants or desires anything. And as a result, he's almost become like a child again. And he's become one with nature. And I think he's also an image of one of our spiritual fantasies. I put in here a lyric from a group who you probably haven't heard of called British Sea Power, who are a sort of rock group who were around a few years ago. And they had a song about death. And they describe death as a fantasy of death, as going back to nature. And in the lyrics they say, drape yourself in greenery, become part of the scenery. And what Tolkien is doing with Tom Bombadil is he's exploring a particular spiritual fantasy which most human beings have, which is that we may be able to return to nature, to become totally innocent, to sink back into nature and become like the trees and the animals are. It's impossible, but it's a sort of spiritual fantasy. So Tom Bombadil is someone who has passed beyond all desire, and that's sort of represented as the ultimate spiritual goal. Another very strong theme, which is linked to the last one, is the idea that if we set out to save something for other people, we often have to lose it ourselves. And again, Tolkien had lived through this because he went off to fight the First World War to save British society and to save Western society and Christian society from what was seen as barbarism. Okay? But like most of the people who fought in the First World War, he came home to a country that he didn't particularly recognise and didn't feel at home in anymore, and he couldn't talk to anyone about his experiences. One of the problems with going to war is that when you come back from war, you can't talk about it to the people that you love because it is indescribable, and in a sense you don't want to talk about it. So you come home, but you're no longer at home. It's no longer your home. Okay? And on a different, less traumatic level, this is what happens to all of us. Okay? We set out to leave home, and we think we can go back again, but as we grow and develop, our ability to go home disappears. As Bob Dylan said in the famous song, "No Direction Home." I went back to the village where I was born for the first time this summer to see my last surviving relative, who is 95 years old. Sadly, her only son had died. I hadn't been to this village since 1983, when I left, age 13. And most of the village shop was still there. The playground where I played on the swings was still there. Amazingly, the little iron foundry in the village was still there. Everything was still there and was still the same. And I thought I would be overwhelmed by a real warm feeling of coming home. But it was all there, but none of it was the same. And none of it was the same because I'd changed. And it was a really, really melancholy visit because I stood in the middle of the village where I had all these golden memories of childhood, and I thought, there is no way back. I'm right physically here, but there is like a closed door that I can no longer walk through because I myself have changed. And for me, the saddest bit in the whole of The Lord of the Rings is right at the end, when they come, or almost right at the end. They've defeated Sauron, they've destroyed the ring, everything is wonderful. They've left everybody else behind, and it's just the four hobbits who started out together, and they are just riding on their ponies back into the Shire. And Merry says, "Well, here we are, just the four of us that started out together," said Merry. "We have left the rest behind, one after another. It seems almost like a dream that has slowly faded." "Not to me," said Frodo. "To me, it feels more like falling asleep again." And it's the saddest line for me in the whole book, because it's telling us that Frodo, having given up everything for the Shire, can no longer be at home in the Shire. Okay? He can no longer go back there. He doesn't belong there. And for some reason, years after I read The Lord of the Rings, I was reading a book about the Second World War, and in it there was a bit about this lady, Marion Countess Donhoff, who was a German aristocrat who had an estate in East Prussia. And at the end of the war in 1945, the Russians invaded the Soviet army, and she was driven out of her home and never saw it again. And she wrote this beautiful thing. She said, "I also do not believe that hating those who have taken over one's homeland necessarily demonstrates love for the homeland. When I remember the woods and lakes of East Prussia, its wide meadows and old shaded avenues, I am convinced that they are still as incomparably lovely as they were when they were my home. Perhaps the highest form of love is love without possessing." And really, that's the central theme of Lord of the Rings, that possession and love are two different things. In fact, two completely opposed things. And the last thing I wanted to point out about Tolkien's treatment of goodness, of good in The Lord of the Rings, is slightly different from this theme of letting go. It's the theme of grace and mercy. And grace is the Christian theme of God's action in the world. God's grace, God gifting us things, just giving us things when we can't help ourselves. And what happens right at the end of the quest, that Frodo and Sam get right into Mount Doom itself, and they are on this sort of bit of rock looking down into the sort of furnace, and all Frodo has to do, he's come hundreds of miles through all these things, all he has to do is just drop the ring into the furnace, and they're done. It's all over. And at that very last moment, he fails completely. Having been so good and done so much, he says to Sam, I do not choose to do that which I came to do. The ring is mine. Okay? So having done all of that, Frodo, the most good person in the story, fails. Okay? And it's really interesting, the language, he doesn't say, I choose to put on the ring. He says, I do not choose to do the thing I have come to do. Because what Tolkien is saying is that his free will has been conquered by his desire, that he can no longer choose. And this made me think of the quote in Romans from St. Paul, for I know that good itself does not dwell in me, that is, in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. Many people believe, from Socrates right through to modern educationalists, that all you have to do is explain to people what good is, and they will then be good. Yeah? And that people who aren't good simply don't know the difference between right and wrong. That is not true. Yeah? Most of us know what is good, but often don't do it because of our weakness, yeah, and our animal nature. And that's what's caught here. So Frodo fails right at the end, but then grace intervenes, because Gollum then attacks Frodo from behind. They wrestle. Gollum bites off Frodo's finger with the ring on it, and then Gollum, who spent centuries trying to get his ring back, dances in delight on the lip of this volcano with the ring, and then he tips over and loses his balance and falls into the fire. So it's finally Gollum who destroys the ring, although unintentionally. Okay. Now this, Tolkien is clearly saying, is the work of God, or of some kind of higher power. Frodo's enormous moral effort mattered because it got him to Mount Doom. He failed at the last step, but God's grace intervened and made sure that everything was all right. But importantly, Gollum wouldn't have been able to bite the ring off his hand and then fall into the chasm unless Frodo had made the decision several times earlier in the story not to kill him. So if Sam had had his way and Gollum had been killed, there would have been no happy ending to the story. So it's quite subtle. Tolkien is saying Frodo is a hero. His moral courage matters enormously, and his mercy is what ultimately destroys the ring. Nevertheless, God's grace is needed, that intervention from God, for the happy ending. Now I move on to evil, Tolkien's treatment of evil. And I've subtitled this, The Eye That Sees Everything and Nothing. And Sauron is depicted throughout the story as this eye, this all-seeing eye. And in some ways, physically, Sauron does see everything. Okay? He knows a lot more than any other character in the story. But at the same time, as you'll see, he is blind to certain things. In some ways, this eye sees nothing. Now, one of the big themes that Tolkien covers in Lord of the Rings I've used this quote from Nietzsche, which some of you may have heard before, a very famous quote. He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. There are several characters in The Lord of the Rings who are on the good side, but they become evil. And they become evil in their efforts to fight Sauron, but they do so in the wrong way. And this is a very easy thing to do. If you think of the example of somebody who sets out to become a politician because they want to change the world for the better, and gradually the more powerful they become, the more they forget why they set out to become a politician in the first place. Yeah? Or the soldier who sets out to fight an enemy for all the good reasons, but ends up as a torturer. Okay? So there are many examples of this in life. The example I've chosen here is this character Denethor, who is the steward of Gondor. And Denethor hates Sauron and wants to fight him, and his city of Minas Tirith has been defending everyone else for years. This is a brave and noble man, but he falls into evil and ultimately into madness. And that's because his motives are impure. Frodo is prepared to sacrifice everything to destroy the ring. He's prepared to leave the Shire and never to go home again. He's prepared to lose everything. Denethor, when asked by Gandalf, what would you have? He says, I would have things as they were in all the days of my life, answered Denethor, and in the days of my long fathers before me, to be lord of this city in peace, and leave my chair to a son after me, who would be his own master and no wizard's pupil. So Denethor ultimately is fighting Sauron, but he's fighting for his own selfish reasons. He wants to preserve his power, his influence. He wants comfort. He wants things not to change, to stay the same. And again, this reminds me of a Bible quotation from Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. And here again we see that Tolkien is a Christian writer, because Tolkien makes it quite clear in the work. Denethor is a physically brave person, as is his son Boromir, who also fails and falls into evil. They are quite prepared to pick up a sword and go out and fight, but their motives are not pure. To quote T.S. Eliot, they commit the greatest treason to do the right deed for the wrong reason. So again, it's very Christian, because Tolkien says it's not enough to do good, you have to be good. And to be good costs everything. Then we get to what for me is the most interesting bit in The Lord of the Rings, which is this treatment of evil. Now, one of the great questions about evil, which goes back long before Christianity, is what is evil? Is evil a thing, or is it a sort of nothingness, a sort of absence? And Christianity is very careful not to answer that question, because Christianity finds itself with a problem if it answers it clearly one way or the other. On the one hand, evil seems pretty real. Yeah? When we suffer and when evil people do evil things, it seems pretty real. On the other hand, evil has a smack of nothingness about it. In Faust, Mephistopheles says, I am the spirit that negates forever. And often people talk about serial killers, and they will say, I was surprised by how ordinary and boring they were. Yeah? That banality of evil. It's almost as if evil people they don't have an extra ingredient called evil that the rest of us don't have. It's as if they are missing something. There's a hole at the centre of them. Jean-Paul Sartre talks about this, where he says, nothingness lies coiled in the heart of being like a worm. And you can see this in Tolkien's work. One of the most interesting things, if you stop and think about it, is the one character who doesn't appear in The Lord of the Rings is the Lord of the Rings. Sauron is the Lord of the Rings. He never appears in the book. at all. One is almost tempted to ask, does he actually exist in the first place? He does not appear as a character at all. The ring itself, is it a character or not? At one point, Gandalf says the ring wants to get back to its master, as if the ring has a mind, as if it is an evil character. And yet at the same time, you're tempted to think it's just a ring. It drives people mad because they keep thinking about it and keep talking about it. It's nothing more than a psychic amplifier. So Tolkien does this deliberately. The main villain is invisible. We never see him. The ring itself, we don't know whether it is just a magic ring or whether it actually has a mind of its own. And then lastly, he uses the phrase shadow all the time. Mordor is described as the land of shadow. The evil is described as the shadow. Gandalf says at one point to one of these Black Riders, go back to the shadow. Okay? And think about what a shadow is. A shadow is not a thing. A shadow is an absence of light. Something blocks out the light and it creates a gap, a shadow, where the light should be. So it's this idea that evil is not a thing at all. It's a nothingness. Okay? And I think we need a verb in the English language, by the way, for evil people, because I think what evil people do is that they nuff. Okay? What evil people do is where they find things and people, they turn them into nothingness. They nuff them. That's what evil does. And another very strong theme in Tolkien is that good, and again we come back to the eye, we always come back to the eye and vision. Good can see evil, but evil cannot see good. Now, if you think about the world on a factual basis, which is stronger, evil or good? Which is stronger, suffering or happiness? The answer is pretty obvious in a factual sense. Suffering is stronger than happiness. Evil is stronger than good. The philosopher Schopenhauer said, if you want to understand the world, just remember the picture of two animals, one eating the other. Okay? The animal eating its meal is having a nice meal, good, certain amount of pleasure. The other animal is in a paroxysm of terror and its existence is about to end. And that's how nature works. So Schopenhauer was very clear. He said the world is much more evil than good. Okay? And that would appear on a factual level to be true. At the end of the day, no matter what we do, what we build, how much we love, what we try to do, death awaits us all. We all lose in the end. Okay? So that's a pretty grim picture of the world. Why is it then that all religions see good as being more powerful, mightier, ultimately, than evil? Well, Tolkien kind of gives us the answer here. He says good is more powerful spiritually than evil because good can see evil. Good can understand it and comprehend it. I may not be evil. I'm not particularly good either, I hasten to add, but I'm not evil. But I can understand evil. Yeah? I can understand the motivations that lead people to do terrible things. I can see evil. I can reach out to it and understand it. Evil cannot see good. Okay? And I'll give a quote here from 1984, a very different kind of story, a very different kind of writer. Winston Smith says, I hate purity. I hate goodness. I don't want virtue to exist anywhere. I want everyone to be corrupt to the bones. Now, I'm slightly quoting out of context here, but arguably Winston Smith says that because he lives under a system that has completely destroyed any sense of truth. It's got to the point where people cannot see truth. They cannot believe in it. I have not met many evil people, thankfully. I've led a pretty cosy, closeted life. I've spent most of my life in places like this. Evil does not tend to stalk the corridors of English private schools, okay? Hopefully not. But I have met a couple of people. One of them was a pupil of mine, who I'm convinced were they gave me the shivers. Yeah, they were evil. Yeah, and this particular person did end up taking their own life, interestingly. And what they had, I was an RE teacher, and this girl, very beautiful girl from a very rich family, she was a model for Storm Model Agency. She sat at the back of the class and just fixed me with a stare as I spoke about God and goodness and love and ethics. And the stare on her face said, "You are a fool. All of this is a lie." Yeah? The stare on her face said, "Only one thing matters in life, and that is power. Power and influence over other people." Yeah? She viewed me as an idiot, and many, many other people as idiots as well. She could not see truth. When I spoke about truth, the reason she hated me and hated what I was saying is because she believed this is a lie. Yeah? This is another evil person who is just dressing themselves up in clothes and using words to get away with whatever their scheme is, their plan is. Okay? So the interesting thing about evil is that it cannot perceive goodness, but goodness can perceive evil. And you see this is at the heart of the story. At the Council of Elrond, when they're trying to work out what to do with the ring, they have this big argument. Some of them say, well, let's use the ring, because then we'll be mightier than Sauron and we can defeat him. Others say, let's take the ring and throw it into the sea, where he'll never find it. One of them says, let's give Tom Bombadil the ring. And somebody else says, no, he won't, he'll lose it. It'll be of no interest to him. Okay? And Gandalf comes up with the plan that they actually use. He says, no, we're going to have to walk into Mordor and destroy the ring. And he says, let folly be our cloak, a veil before the eyes of the enemy. For he is very wise and weighs all things to a nicety in the scales of his malice. In other words, he's exceptionally clever, Sauron. But the only measure that he knows is desire. Desire for power. And so he judges all hearts. In other words, Sauron's great weakness is Sauron thinks everybody is like Sauron. He cannot imagine goodness. Into his heart the thought will not enter that any will refuse it, that having the ring we may seek to destroy it. And that's what finally undoes him. That's what finally destroys Sauron. Sauron is convinced that one of them, Gandalf, Aragorn, is going to put on the ring and come and challenge him. And he's afraid, but the one thing that never enters his mind is that they're actually trying to throw it away, that they're actually trying to get rid of it. And here I get to the last one, and this is where we get a bit philosophically deep. Okay, so bear with me. Again, we're back to vision, the eye. Evil is the habit of seeing through things rather than looking at them. And now I'm going to ask a philosophical question. What am I? No rude answers, please. What am I?
A human.
A human, thank you. What is that? What is a human?
Species.
A species? Yeah? I think we're like a subspecies, aren't we? I'm not sure. My biology isn't very good. We're an animal. I am an animal. Yeah? That's what I am. Yeah? I was born. Yeah? I was a fetus. I came out of my mother's womb. Like most animals, I am basically just a highly complex plumbing system on legs. Okay? And one day I will die, i.e. bits of me will stop working, and then I will decay and fall apart. In the meantime, I do quite a lot of eating, and burping and going to the toilet and sleeping and stuff like that. And that's pretty much it. I am an organism, okay? Made up of lots of smaller life forms. Everyone agrees that's what I am? Yeah? Is that true or not? You're not having it. I think that is true. Yeah? But I'm also something else. I'm also a consciousness, a mind. Yeah? That contains the whole world. All of you are just actors on the stage of my mind. Yeah? When I die, when my consciousness blinks out completely, I take the whole world with me. Yeah? I am a mind that sits outside of nature. According to science, Everything in nature is determined. Nothing is free. Everything is fixed by physical laws. And yet my mind decides to do things all the time. I could decide to hurl myself out of that window right now. I'm not going to, but I could. Okay? So my mind is mysterious. It sits outside of nature. It is transcendent. It is spiritual. People use words like transcendent and spiritual sometimes and think they're talking about something in some unseen realm somewhere else. They're not. I am the supernatural. My mind is the supernatural. My free will is the supernatural. But I am also an animal. Yeah? I am an actor on the stage of life, but I am also the person sat in the audience watching myself and watching everyone else. Both those things are true. So I can be seen and understood in two different ways. Evil is when you lose the ability to see things in those two ways. Here we get to the conflict between Gandalf and Saruman. And Gandalf and Saruman are both the same. They're both Istari. They're both these spiritual beings who were sent to combat Sauron. But Saruman falls into evil. And here Gandalf is recounting his meeting with Saruman when he realizes he's turned to evil. I looked then and saw that his robes, which had seemed white, were not so, but were woven of all colours. And if he moved, they shimmered and changed hue, so that the eye was bewildered. I liked white better, I said. White, he sneered. It serves as a beginning. White cloth may be dyed. The white page can be overwritten, and white light can be broken. In which case it is no longer white, said I, and he that breaks a thing to find out what it is has left the path of wisdom. Now, Saruman represents a sort of scientist here. Now, Tolkien wasn't anti-science at all, but what bothered Tolkien was the habit that people had, and this was at a peak in the 1940s when he was writing, of people trying to be scientific about everything, about emotions and feelings and human beings and how to run society. In the 1940s, the communists were saying, we can run society scientifically. Behaviorists were saying, we can change human behavior scientifically. Okay? And really, in a sense, this is what Tolkien is talking about. He's saying, no, you've got to be careful. Science works brilliantly by breaking things down into causes. But if you apply it to human relationships and to moral life, you will end up with a nothingness. You will break things apart. Gollum, another character who falls to evil, does the same thing, but in a slightly more magical or occult way. Gollum goes looking for secrets. As he lowered his eyes, he saw far above the tops of the misty mountains, out of which the stream came. And he thought suddenly it would be cool and shady under those mountains. The sun would not watch me there. The roots of those mountains must be roots indeed. There must be great secrets there which have not been discovered since the beginning. So Gollum goes looking for the roots of the mountains, which is like this idea that you can explain everything by breaking it apart and finding its causes, its roots in a scientific way. When he gets there, all the great secrets under the mountains turned out to be just empty night. There was nothing more to find out, nothing worth doing. He was altogether wretched. He hated the dark, and he hated light more. He hated everything, and the ring most of all. So in their different ways, both Saruman and Gollum go looking for causes. Saruman is like a scientist, Gollum is like a sort of mystic. But they go looking for the roots and causes of things, and they find nothing. Okay? All that happens is that it changes the way that they look at the world until they can't see the surface of life anymore for what it really is. So in their different ways, Sauron, Saruman and Gollum look at the world only in terms of causes, not reasons. They look at the world in a purely scientific or magical, technical way. They desire the world, but they do not love it. That is, they look through things for secrets that will give them power, over the world and stop seeing the world as it actually presents itself to us, as a place of persons and reasons. And that's what evil people do. That's when you know you're dealing with somebody a bit dodgy, when you get the feeling that they're looking through you, that they're thinking about you as something that can be used, maneuvered like a chess piece for their own desires and ends. They see being itself, existence itself, only as a fact. And that fact is scientific. It can be explained, it can be broken down into causes. But they don't see existence as a gift, and gifts can only be explained by reasons. Why have I been given this gift? Why have I been given the gift of existence? That is not a question that passes through the mind of an evil person, because they've lost the ability to ask it. In doing this, Sauron, Saruman and Gollum, they all nuth themselves. Gradually, by looking at the world in this way, they begin to disappear. Okay? So Gollum has become this almost animal-like, pathetic, pitiable sort of creature. He's stopped being a hobbit and he's reduced to the status of an animal. Saruman, when he's finally destroyed, disappears like a puff of smoke on the wind. And Sauron is so far advanced down this path that he's not there anymore. He's completely gone. He's like this all-seeing eye, but he's not there anymore. He is nothingness itself. And again, the experience of running up against evil in human form, that's what it feels like. It feels like running up against the human equivalent of a black hole that is sucking everything into itself. I'll leave you with a final quote from the philosopher Roger Scruton about this idea of the transcendental and where we see it. Scruton says, the I, the self that I was talking about, myself, the I, is transcendental, which does not mean that it exists elsewhere, but that it exists in another way, just as music exists in another way from sound, and God in another way from the world. A little bit philosophical at the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. How long have I prattled on for?
You've talked for 46 minutes.
Oh my God.
So I want the first question of me. Can I take you back to the first part of the talk, just to think about? So I find the most moving moment, the most moving moment in the whole thing, the moment when speaking to Sam, at the end of days, as it were, our little hero says, "We saved the Shire, Sam, but not for me." And it racks my soul, because the man who wrote this went through that experience of the First World War, and really that's what it's about in some ways, but also it's about the fact that that innocence has been lost. So my question really is really about the innocence and the childlike kind of motif that runs through it. And I think I see this in parallel always to Spielberg's works, because I think that the child or the child on the cusp of adulthood is always in a dangerous place, and a place where maybe you're not going to see the fairies anymore and you're going to have to enter the realm of the adult. And just to enter the kingdom of Valinor, you must become as a little child. And really Frodo does that, even though he's lost his innocence. I wonder if you can follow that, if you can say more about that kind of child motif and the importance of innocence as a kind of antithesis to evil.
Well, Tolkien, I think, was not a sentimentalist about childhood, and he disliked what had happened to fairy stories. And Tolkien describes the realm of fairy and the realm of fairy stories as a perilous realm, a place of danger. And Tolkien is quite clear that we are built to grow up, that we have to leave the garden, that we have to leave innocence behind. I think Tolkien is very clear that one of the ways in which a human being can become corrupted is in trying not to grow up, in being a sort of a man-child or a woman-child. There is something sinister and grotesque about that. So I think Tolkien had a distaste for certain fairy stories, notably Peter Pan, which is one that I heartily loathe myself and find quite creepy. So I'm not sure about the childlike motif. I mean, the hobbits aren't children. Frodo is a man, and Frodo goes to Valinor to die, because one of the things about the land of the undying, Valinor, is that if a mortal sets foot in it, it accelerates the process of death. So Frodo is going over the water to die.
Thank you. Questions?
God, I've bored everybody into submission. Yeah.
So, if we just go back to right at the start, we talked about sort of the heroic character of Frodo as being a Christian hero. What if someone were to say that actually perhaps that the heroic characteristics there predate Christianity and that very much in the form of the Julian hero, Aeneas?
Now,
beautiful.
You're about to make me look stupid because I'm not a classical scholar. I don't know. I mean, my understanding is that the pre-Christian hero, yes, can be humble and one who serves others and noble, but usually at some point they march out sword in hand and kill someone. Yeah? The Christian hero is nailed to a cross and killed by other people. I mean, there is a profound shift here.
There is, but certainly in terms of Aeneas, there's a selflessness in the task, because he's doing what he's doing, but he's following his duty. And is that not exactly what sort of Frodo's doing on his mission?
Yeah, they are. I mean, there's plenty of classical heroes who follow their duty. Almost the entire sort of Iliad is built around concepts of duty. I mean, look where it gets them all.
But it's duty to self.
Yeah.
Because that's about your name living on.
Yeah, and here's the key thing. It's the shift from a shame culture to a guilt culture. Pre-Christianity, what you have is a shame culture, and you see this in some of the characters in Tolkien. They talk about their name and their honour. What they mean is, I cannot be seen to be a coward. I cannot be seen to be bad. This is about my name. And their consolation is often, I am about to die in battle, but my name will live on. The difference with the hobbits is the hobbits are transplanted into the Lord of the Rings from the modern age. The hobbits are supposed to represent Christian thinkers. The hobbits don't give a damn about honour. Yeah? They're not, you don't hear Frodo or Sam saying, my name must ring down the ages or anything like that. It's just guilt. Yeah? Frodo is like, if I don't do this, who else is going to do it? And then the Shire is going to die. And Sam is like, I love Frodo, I'm not going to leave him. So they're motivated by guilt and love, not by shame and honour.
Do you not think that Sam is overlooked as a hero of the story and his unwavering support?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
hugely dedicated throughout the entire story, where Frodo was the one that kept giving up and kept going through troubles. Sam just unwavering.
They have two different kinds of strengths, I think. Sam is strong in the way that he carries another person and doesn't give up, but he only wears the ring for about 10 minutes and he's almost overwhelmed by temptation. In 10 minutes, Frodo wears it for months. Frodo is the one who has to carry the existential burden. So Sam is a hero, but Frodo is on the cross. Yeah, there's a different level of suffering going on here. And Sam is left fairly whole at the end of the story. Frodo is utterly mutilated. He can't go home again at all.
I liked your image of Saruman. I wrote something down as I looked at that. Saruman, Lucifer, Lightbringer, splits light into a confusion of colours.
Yeah, he's a Luciferian figure. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I've not read the book. Is it Sauron? Is that?
Yeah, Sauron is the main baddie. Yeah.
To what extent would you then connect Sauron and the ring to Satan and
Well, Sauron is seen as is a satanic figure, definitely, and the ring is satanic in that it tempts people, and it tempts people with their desires. There's a sense that it knows, again, I'm speaking about it as if it has a mind, but it knows everyone's weak spot. It knows what everyone's desire is. So definitely, there's a sort of satanic element there. But again, there's a deliberate thing on Tolkien's part of, does Sauron even exist?
Yeah.
Again, like, does the devil really exist? Or is it just an image, a personification?
Do you think that the novel would still be as significant if it were published today as sort of like a Christological narrative, or is
No.
like with the spiritual elements and stuff, considering we have like different fantasy novels and stuff already? Like,
No, it wouldn't be. It would be completely lost and misunderstood. It was published at a particular moment, and it's interesting that it was published in the same year as The Sea, and Lord of the Flies. It was almost like there was a moment in English thought, certainly, where people were looking at ideas of, because we'd been through decades of the human being can be perfected, of very anti-Christian ideas. You know, the human being can be scientifically perfected. We can conquer human nature. We can conquer the tragedy of life. And there's several books which come out in the same year, 1954, weirdly, which all basically have the theme of, that's rubbish. But if it appeared now, no, it would be completely lost. You have to have an audience that will receive something for it to have meaning.
There's a flip side to that as well, which is that a lot of modern fantasy is only known as a Tolkien.
Yeah. But if you look at the Rings of Power, the series on Amazon that's on at the moment, I mean, I watched a couple of episodes, and then, I mean, I think I physically shuddered, recoiled, nearly vomited, and turned my television off because it carries the brand of Tolkien, and it's garbage. I mean, on every conceivable level, it's spiritual garbage. So, yeah.
Should we say thank you?
About myself then.